the motives and theories behind the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. A historical and curiosity-rich exploration. The uniqueness of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln occupies a singular place in the history of the United States. His presidency, forged in the crucible of the Civil War, combined extraordinary leadership with deep humanity. He is remembered as the great emancipator, the man who preserved the Union and set it on a path toward the abolition of slavery. But his legacy is also forever bound to the tragic event of April 14, 1865, when he became the first American president to be assassinated. His death at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. shocked a nation just beginning to breathe after 4 years of fratricidal conflict. The assassination of Lincoln has been studied from countless perspectives. On the surface, it was the act of John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer. But the motives, the wider conspiracy, and the strange coincidences surrounding Lincoln's death have fascinated historians, conspiracy theorists, and the general public for over 150 years. In examining these motives and theories, one finds not only a story of political violence, but also a portrait of a man whose death generated myths, legends, and enduring curiosities. The historical background: a nation at war's end. By April 1865, the Civil War was effectively over. Confederate General Robert E. Lee had surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th. The Union had prevailed, but the wounds of war were still raw. Cities were destroyed, families divided, and 4 million enslaved people stood on the uncertain threshold of freedom. Lincoln had just delivered his second inaugural address on March 4th, a speech remarkable for its humility and religious depth. "With malice toward none, with charity for all," he had urged, reflecting his desire for reconciliation rather than vengeance. Yet not everyone shared this vision. Many in the South felt embittered, humiliated, and fearful of what emancipation would mean. At the same time, radical voices in the North demanded harsher punishment for rebels. This volatile atmosphere created fertile ground for extremist acts. For Confederate sympathizers like Booth, Lincoln represented tyranny and destruction. In Booth's mind, assassinating the president was not only revenge, but also an attempt to rescue Southern honor and possibly revive the dying cause of the Confederacy. The motives of John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was a celebrated actor, handsome and charismatic, belonging to a famous theatrical family. But beneath the surface, he harbored deep political passions. He was an outspoken advocate of slavery, an ardent supporter of the Confederacy, and a man consumed by hatred of Lincoln. Booth's motives were both ideological and personal. Ideologically, he believed Lincoln had betrayed the Constitution by waging war against the South and destroying its institutions. In Booth's words, Lincoln was a tyrant and despot. Personally, Booth was frustrated by his declining career and jealous of the fame Lincoln enjoyed. Originally, Booth had plotted not to kill, but to kidnap Lincoln. The plan was to abduct the president and exchange him for Confederate prisoners of war. But after Lee's surrender, Booth's desperation deepened. He shifted from kidnapping to assassination, hoping that killing Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William H. Seward simultaneously would decapitate the Union government and give the Confederacy a chance to regroup. The conspiracy: Booth and his accomplices. Booth did not act alone. His small band of conspirators included Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne, George Atzerodt, David Herold, and Mary Surratt. Each had a specific role. Powell was assigned to kill Secretary of State Seward, Atzerodt to kill Vice President Johnson, and Booth to kill Lincoln. The conspirators often met at Mary Surratt's boarding house, which later became infamous in the trial that followed. Booth, as the charismatic leader, inspired the group with his fiery speeches and dramatic sense of destiny. Yet not all conspirators had the same level of commitment. Atzerodt, for example, never attempted his assigned task. The scope of the conspiracy raises enduring questions. Was this merely a group of desperate individuals, or was there a broader Confederate hand behind them? Some theories suggest links between Booth and Confederate agents operating in Canada. The evidence remains circumstantial, but the possibility of a wider network has kept historians debating for generations. The night at Ford's Theatre. On April 14, 1865, Good Friday, Lincoln decided to attend a play at Ford's Theatre, Our American Cousin, a popular comedy. He was accompanied by his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, and their guests, Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris. Booth, familiar with the theater's layout as a performer, knew the president would be in the presidential box. At about 10:15 p.m., during one of the play's funniest lines, Booth slipped into the box, drew a single-shot Derringer pistol, and fired a bullet into the back of Lincoln's head. Rathbone attempted to stop him, and Booth slashed him with a dagger before leaping onto the stage, crying, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants. A little-known curiosity. Booth broke his leg in the leap, though he still managed to escape on horseback. Lincoln, unconscious, was carried across the street to the Peterson house, where he remained in a coma until he died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15th. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton's words at his passing became immortal. "Now he belongs to the ages." The immediate aftermath and national mourning. The assassination plunged the nation into grief. Churches tolled bells, businesses closed, and cities draped themselves in black. For many, Lincoln's death was not only the loss of a leader, but also the loss of a father figure who had guided the country through its darkest hour. Booth fled south, aided by Harold. After a 12-day manhunt, Union soldiers surrounded him in a barn in Virginia. Booth refused to surrender and was shot. The other conspirators were captured, tried by a military tribunal, and several, including Mary Surratt, were executed. Surratt's execution remains controversial, as some argue her guilt was never fully proven. Curiosities and eerie coincidences. Lincoln's assassination is surrounded by a wealth of curiosities that add to its aura of tragedy and mystery. Lincoln's dreams of his death. Just days before the assassination, Lincoln told friends of a dream in which he wandered through the White House and found mourners weeping over a coffin. When he asked who had died, someone replied, "The President." Coincidences with John F. Kennedy. Over time, people have noted eerie parallels between Lincoln's assassination and that of John F. Kennedy. Both presidents were elected in a year ending in 1860 and 1960. Both were succeeded by men named Johnson, and both were shot in the head on a Friday. Relics of the night. The blood-stained pillow on which Lincoln died, the Derringer pistol, and even strands of his hair were preserved. These artifacts remain objects of fascination in museums. The unfinished evening. Mary Todd Lincoln reportedly invited General Grant and his wife to join them at Ford's Theatre, but they declined. Had they attended, security might have been tighter. Such curiosities remind us that history is not only shaped by grand causes, but also by strange accidents and coincidences. Theories and debates. Was Booth truly alone? While Booth is undoubtedly the central figure, debates have persisted about whether he acted entirely on his own initiative. Some theories suggest Confederate government officials, especially those based in Canada, may have encouraged or even directed him. Booth himself carried a diary in which several pages were missing, fueling speculation that evidence of broader involvement was suppressed. Others have pointed to the astonishing ease with which Booth carried out his plan. How could the President of the United States be left so vulnerable? Was there negligence or even complicity among those tasked with protecting him? Lincoln had few guards, and his bodyguard that night, John Parker, actually left his post to watch the play. Though most historians agree Booth was not part of a vast conspiracy, the unanswered questions ensure that the assassination continues to inspire alternative theories. The legacy of Lincoln's assassination. Lincoln's death transformed him from a political leader into a martyr. His vision of reconciliation was cut short, and the period of Reconstruction unfolded with far greater bitterness than he might have intended. Had Lincoln lived, some speculate, the integration of freed slaves and the healing of North and South might have followed a gentler course. Internationally, his assassination shocked the world. European newspapers eulogized him as a modern statesman of unmatched moral stature. For Americans, the memory of Lincoln's sacrifice became part of national identity. His image, words, and legacy were enshrined in monuments, literature, and collective memory. Conclusion: a life and death of profound meaning. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln cannot be understood solely as the act of one man, John Wilkes Booth. It was the product of a nation divided, a war that unleashed passions of hate and revenge, and a moment in history that magnified the fragility of leadership. Yet beyond the political and historical dimensions, Lincoln's death carries a deeply human resonance. Lincoln was not only a president, but also a man of introspection, humor, melancholy, and extraordinary empathy. His assassination left Americans with the sense of having lost not merely a leader, but a unique moral compass. Even in death, Lincoln's aura only grew, and the curiosities and myths surrounding his final days reflect a people's attempt to hold on to a figure who symbolized their highest aspirations. In studying the motives and theories of his assassination, one cannot escape the sense that Lincoln was truly special, a man who guided his country through catastrophe, paid the ultimate price, and whose story continues to echo across centuries.